Welcome to another American Bankruptcy Institute podcast. I'm Sam Gerdano, ABI Executive Director. Among the most revered Americans today are those who served in our armed forces. This is especially so for those who return from military service disabled from combat. Now, you'd think a grateful nation would do everything possible to make the transition to private life easy for those who sacrificed so much, but fall on hard financial times. In fact, however, some federal laws can unintentionally actually discriminate against disabled veterans. Such is the case with a little-known quirk of the personal bankruptcy law we'll discuss today. With us are three members of ABI's Task Force on Veterans Affairs. In addition to their passion for service, they are committed to fixing a clear error that made its way into the 2005 Code amendments when Congress decided to means test eligibility for Chapter 7 relief. Jay Bender is a partner in the Birmingham, Alabama office of Bradley, Arant, Boult, Cummings, and a past chair of the firm's bankruptcy practice. He represented Jefferson County in its landmark Chapter 9 case. A fellow in the American College of Bankruptcy, he earned an undergraduate degree with honors from Duke and a law degree with honors from the University of North Carolina. We'll ask him later who he roots for in college basketball. Kristina Stanger is a member of the commercial litigation practice at Nyemaster Goode in Des Moines, Iowa. Christine was commissioned as a Medical Service Corps officer in the U.S. Army in 2000 and served in Iraq from 2003 through 2004. She continues to serve as an officer in the Iowa National Guard. She graduated with high honors from Drake University Law School, where she was a member of the Law Review, and was just named to ABI's 40 Under 40 for 2018. John Thompson is a partner in the bankruptcy practice at McGuireWoods here in Washington, D.C. He's also practiced for Cadwalader, Weil Gotshal, and Greenberg Traurig over his legal career. John spent nearly 7 years as a captain in the U.S. Army as a decorated aviation officer after college, before earning a law degree with honors from American University, where he also earned a master's in international relations. So welcome to you all. Thanks for your service to our nation, and also thanks for your service on the task force and for joining us on ABI Podcasts.
Thank you.
You bet.
So first, if I can get maybe Kristina to explain the problem here. How does the Bankruptcy Code, as currently written, discriminating against disabled veterans?
So, Sam, you wouldn't think that in our days, as you just reported, that where serving our country is an honored profession, that we would have a structural discriminatory treatment of our military and disabled veteran community in our own bankruptcy code. And yet, we certainly do have a problem here. What we think is an unintended consequence of the revisions from 2005. But what we have is that in the definitions section of the code, 101-10A, actually mandates that this veteran disability benefits would be included in the calculation of income as veterans seek to trigger the rights and protections of the bankruptcy code. Honestly, as a creditor's rights attorney, when I heard this, I was even outraged. So here we are seeking to achieve some parity between the treatment of our disabled veterans and other disabled members of our country in rectifying these definitional issues. We'll tell you a little bit more about what we mean with that as we go into the podcast here.
So explain that further. So the disparity is the treatment between medical disability benefits and other benefits to disabled Americans under the Disability Act or the Social Security provisions. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's exactly right, Sam. So what you have in the definition section under 101-10A, and through the process in 2005, what we had is a narrowing, right, of the bankruptcy code and its application, and in trying to reel in some of the discretion that judges were using in calculating what sort of income went into the means test. And in that process, there were 3 exemptions included. And one of those, as far as relevant to today's discussion, was the exemption for Social Security disability income. That sort of income for the everyday disabled citizen is not included in the calculation, whereas a disabled veteran's disability benefits, which comes from the government as well, just through the Veterans Administration, is included in the income calculation. And so what you end up with is you may have two individuals, for example. You may have Jay Bender here, who's a non-veteran, who's receiving Social Security disability income from gout. And at the same time, you have Kristina Stanger here, who's a disabled veteran receiving disability income because she has an injury she sustained from an improvised explosive device. Jay would be able to exempt his disability income as he seeks bankruptcy protection. However, because of the revisions in 2005, Kristina, the disabled veteran, would not be able to exempt those disability payments because they are not specifically listed as an exemption. And so what we have found since 2005 is that courts have been hamstrung into actually forcing those veterans to use and include those disability payments as income as they seek bankruptcy protection and try to reset some of these financial hardships that they may be facing.
Is it possible that that Congress intended the definition of current monthly income to operate in a way that treats disabled vets worse than others who are disabled?
No, Sam, this is John. I really don't think so. There was obviously a public policy intent on the part of Congress to exempt certain income from being calculated for the means test, and they thought that Social Security disability income was a category that should have been qualified as being exempt. We can't imagine that there was an intent here on the part of Congress to take some of our most honorable citizens who have served their country in uniform and happen to have become disabled as a part of or as a consequence of that service, to have their income included. I just don't think that made any sense from a public policy perspective.
Yeah, Sam, this is Jay.
Yes, sir.
To John's point, he and I recently wrote an article along with Elizabeth Gunn that was in the ABI Journal on this issue. And in preparing that, we looked and tried to see if there's anything in the legislative history of BAPSIPA that really addressed why there were these three specific exclusions that were made, but no similar exclusion for VA disability benefits. And we couldn't find anything. The history on that point was very scant. And it's hard to think that this was intentional. When you think about the exclusions for Social Security disability benefits, for compensation for victims of war crimes, and for compensation for victims of international terrorism, you would think clearly that veterans who were disabled in combat, perhaps as a result of war crimes or as a result of terrorism, that their VA disability benefits would have been excluded. But they weren't, and we clearly think that was an oversight.
What about the role of judges here? I mean, traditionally, judges have had discretion in terms of defining key terms that may be ambiguous. Do they have any equitable power in their discretion to fix what seems to be a clear error? Are there any court decisions that we can point to?
Hey, Sam, this is Jay again. Unfortunately not. They used to. They used to have a good bit of discretion before BAPSIPA was enacted. Back before 2005, the code really left it to a judge's discretion to decide what would be included in a debtor's disposable income. And income would not be considered disposable if that income was reasonably necessary for the support of the debtor and his or her dependents. And based on that standard, courts, I think, routinely found that VA disability benefits would not be part of disposable income. Again, we looked, but haven't found any cases prior to 2005 in which courts found that VA disability benefits should be included in their disposable Kristina explained, that changed with PAPSIPA's amendment. Since then, 5 courts have addressed this issue, and all of them have ruled correctly, unfortunately, based on how the code is currently drafted, against the veterans. And they found that because of Congress's express exclusion of only 3 categories of income, that they did not have any latitude in creating a 4th exception. The leading and most recent of those 5 cases is Judge Furey's 2017 opinion in Inri Bra, which came out of the Eastern District of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. In that case, the Chapter 13 trustee objected to confirmation of the debtor's Chapter 13 plan because the debtors, who included a veteran, did not include VA disability benefits in the plan. The debtors argued that their VA disability benefits shouldn't have to be included because those benefits were exempt from the reach of creditors under non-bankruptcy law, federal law. But the court rejected that argument and said that that she could not create a new exception. One thing that Judge Furey did in her opinion, which is a great opinion, is that she, unlike the other courts, specifically addressed the bankruptcy code's disparate treatment of VA disability benefits compared to Social Security disability benefits. And her opinion indicates some real sympathy to the veterans' arguments, but she said that was an exception for Congress to create, not for her court. Right.
So this is just a plain language interpretation.
Yeah, and thanks to Judge Furey, she really shined a light on the issue. And frankly, I don't know that we'd be here today if it weren't for her opinion, really highlighting the problem.
And if I may add, it's really interesting, especially kind of going off of Judge Furey's opinion, that you might note as a creditor that you actually can't access these disability benefits but for bankruptcy. I mean, they're exempt in so far, state law from execution remedies or creditors' rights anyway.
Mm-hmm. What's the sense of the scope of the problem? How many disabled veterans are potentially adversely impacted by this legislative oversight?
Sam, this is John. I'll try to take that one. I think the difficulty is in knowing exactly how many veterans are impacted here. But we do know a couple of things, given our experience and the general statistics, right? There are 4.7 million veterans out there in America, and we know that 5 in 10 military families face financial problems of some sort or another. So while it's difficult to know exactly how many are impacted, I think we feel very certain that the number of potentially impacted veterans and military service members, for that matter, is pretty substantial. I'll say this too, as a former commander in the Army and a leader of soldiers, I personally know all too well that 5 in 10 military families facing financial problems. Now, that's a real statistic, right? I mean, when we see terrific soldiers in uniform, we know that dynamic doesn't change after they leave military service. So it certainly would be representative of the veterans demographic. But we know that a number of things happen when financial problems strike, right? That it causes difficulty in the home. It's extraordinarily debilitating to morale, and sometimes can impact their capability for obtaining security clearances. And many of these people continue to serve in capacities after they leave the service as veterans in jobs that require some kind of security clearance. We know it affects them as commanders in uniform, and I'm altogether certain that it affects them afterwards. I know, Kristina, you probably have your own war stories to talk about families and their dependents as a result of financial distress while in service. But I wonder if you had any thoughts.
Yes, I think you really nailed it here, John, because not only does it impact security clearances and the morale and readiness of a unit to actually do their mission, but even outside of that, if soldiers are thinking about their families and their financial issues, they're not thinking about the safety and concern of the folks to the left and right of them. And then beyond service, right? So in my opportunity to serve with the National Guard, I see a lot of lifelong servants of our military, but also then I see their relationships in the communities. And, these statistics are real as far as the embarrassment of seeking, right? There's still a stigma there that they aren't able to control their financial issues. And these are, outstanding individuals. And there's that pride of service. And so knowing that they may have a financial issue and taking that to their command team or taking that to and asking for help, it's just not, this isn't really that community that's used to doing that. And, maybe there's a stigma or an embarrassment associated with it. So there's all these other ramifications. I mean, suicide is in the forefront of our headlines these days. And, I'm not naive to think, and I don't think our audience is naive to think that certainly financial distress might have a underplay to some of that. And why shouldn't these folks have an opportunity for that fresh start that the rest of our citizens do? As you said, I think, John, this isn't, it's almost like a cancer. It's insidious. It impacts not only their military readiness, but their families, and extends into even their civilian and community relationships.
I just wanted to correct one thing. I think John said that there are 4.7 million veterans, and that's just the number of veterans who are receiving disability benefits, according to recent VA statistics. I think the total veteran population in the U.S. is around 19 million. And when you think about 4.7 million people receiving VA disability benefits who are confronted with the situation where those benefits are exempt outside of bankruptcy, but will come into play and be on the table if they file, we think that the issue is really huge. And again, it's hard to know who is, how do you count the number of people who are deterred from filing? There are no ready statistics on that, but all indications are it's a significant issue. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, thanks, Jay. I did mean to say 4.7 million disabled veterans, but I think, Sam, the whole point to all of the narratives you heard from myself, Kristina, and Jay is that while we don't know the number, we're very confident that it is substantial.
Right.
Right, and so that's some of the issue is when you're when you're talking policy levels and how many of my veterans in my state are impacted. When we start talking with senators, we can give them really good examples of individuals, but the whole policy thought behind this, it's just outrageous for me to tell an individual, it's actually better for you to be outside of bankruptcy because you'll actually be treated worse by our structure and our code.
Well, it sounds like from certainly the cases that have been decided, including the one from Wisconsin you mentioned, that there's a relatively straightforward legislative fix. Even as difficult as it is to imagine legislative fixes in Washington in the same sentence here, but if you will, kind of explain the legislation that's been introduced and bipartisan legislation at that, and a little bit about how that would fix the problem.
I'll be happy to. The bill has not yet been introduced, but it should be in a matter of weeks. And that bill is called the Honoring American Veterans in Extreme Need Act, or the Haven Act. That bill was drafted by Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, and if and when it's passed, and we think it's going to be when it's passed, it's going to exclude veterans' disability benefits broadly, just like Social Security disability benefits are currently excluded from the disposable income and the current monthly income definitions. The Act, while it hasn't been introduced, it already has really, really good bipartisan support. Senator John Cornyn of Texas, a Republican, has agreed to be the lead co-sponsor of the bill, along with Senator Baldwin, a Democrat. And right now, joining them as additional co-sponsors of the bill are Senator Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat from California, Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican out of North Carolina, Senator Patrick Leahy, a Democrat out of Vermont, Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican out of Kristina Stanger's home state of Iowa, and Senator Doug Jones, a Democrat out of my home state of Alabama. So we expect that in the weeks to come that those ranks are going to be joined by additional co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle, and we're proud that a number of our current co-sponsors sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which will have initial responsibility for the bill since it involves the bankruptcy code. So the members of the task force are working hard, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that the Haven Act is going to be part of the bankruptcy code in the very near future.
What can those who are listening to this podcast do to help turn the Haven Act into law?
I think you can help us as practitioners out there if you've come in contact with clients or individuals facing this particular dilemma. Come and tell us your stories. Obviously, if those individuals are willing to, although it's difficult for them in many or most cases to come forward with their individual stories, we'd love to bring them to their representatives in Congress, but as good, I think, would be to know what those stories are from practitioners on an anecdotal basis, so that we can share them with policymakers and drive this process forward. I think it would also be terrific if individual lawyers were writing their elected representatives, write your congressman, write your senator to help with this. And finally, I think that to the extent that folks have contact with military service organizations or veteran service organizations like the American Legion and others, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association, that those particular organizations will carry carry that message on and are very effective at doing so, and can be terrific advocates for this cause if we can get them in support of it. And we are already garnering that support, but those stories coming from practitioners out there in the field who are experiencing this firsthand on the part of their clients would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, John. You highlight that a number of our members may be veterans or may have veterans in their family. Those veteran service organizations and military service organizations, they had been aware of this act, most of them, and they were just waiting kind of for that, the tide to turn. And politically now's the time. We've got some great momentum. As you know, we had help from non-veterans, non-bankruptcy practitioners. In fact, a lot of us give a lot of deference to Holly Petraeus, who stomped around the Hill with us on Monday and Tuesday. I mean, hanging out with some bankruptcy lawyers certainly, maybe wasn't on the top of her list 3 weeks ago. But we were very blessed and fortunate to be able to communicate the reality of the issue. And we have some amazing traction and some really hard workers right now looking to put this forward. And I also wanted to emphasize that unlike other, perhaps bankruptcy bills, quote, in the past, this is really a veterans issue and a veterans bill that's coming forward. And yes, it's something that us as bankruptcy practitioners have an opportunity to impact in our world. Really, really straightforward fix. So look forward to folks helping us or reaching out, giving us your story, or maybe reaching out to those folks that that, frankly, this could give some hope to where they may have been struggling in the past.
And one other thing I would mention is that when people, when they contact their congressmen or VSOs, considering, including a copy of the article from the ABI in the November edition last year on this issue that John Thompson, Elizabeth Gunn, and I wrote, it's an easy way to give them information and some background, or include the link to this podcast.
Right. Will do. Well, thank you all, Kristina and John and Jay, for joining me, and best of luck in your efforts to get the Haven Act passed as soon as possible.
If I may, Sam, could I just add one thing of personal privilege?
Sure.
Kristina and I and the rest of our whole committee want to thank Jay Bender, our colleague and friend, for really spearheading this effort. He's been a terrific leader, notwithstanding the fact that as he often demurs to the rest of us who had worn uniform, he certainly is in service of all of us who have worn the uniform, and we thank him for his outstanding efforts.
I second that motion and would point out, did you see how quickly he threw out that VSO acronym, John? I think we've converted him.
I think we have indeed.
A point well made. Well, we thank you again, and we also thank our audience for listening. There are more than 200 ABI podcasts on various bankruptcy topics available at our website, abi.org. And you can also subscribe to the podcast via the SoundCloud app. So until next time, this is Sam Gerdano for the American Bankruptcy Institute saying good day.